So, hello, good evening. Can you hear me right at the back there? Don't have a strong voice, but we have a good microphone. So, as you may have heard or seen on the internet, my name is Andy. And this evening, I have been asked to give an introduction to the Tibetan Buddhist practice called Tong. Now, I should explain. Oh, right. Is that better? I used to live in Thailand for about 22 years, and during that period I discovered this group, the Little Bang group. And a couple of things that drew me to it. One, the Buddhism was in English, because I don't speak Thai. And the other one was it is completely non-sectarian. In other words, it welcomes people, teachers, participants from any of the three main branches of Buddhism. And here in Thailand, in Southeast Asia, the type of Buddhism which is done by local people is sometimes called Theravadan. There are other words as well. And then another kind of Buddhism is called Zen Buddhism. And this also is slightly different because the emphasis on Buddhism is different. And this is often called Mahayana Buddhism. And Zen is practiced mainly in China, South Korea, and Japan. And then the flavor of Buddhism that I find myself practicing is called Tibetan Buddhism, otherwise known as Vajrayana Buddhism. Now, all three flavors of Buddhism are connected. One is neither better or worse than another. It's just that one of the unique things I like about Buddhism is because there are thousands of different ways in which to connect with your own Buddha nature. And those of you who might be skeptical about that should reflect on the first teaching that Buddha gave. Anybody know what the first teaching of Buddha was? Don't give me in Sanskrit or Pali, in English. Anybody? Doesn't matter if you look intelligent in the pullover. That's right. You see, you did know. And these was the first teaching, first public teaching that Buddha gave 2,500 years ago or so in a place called Sanath, near what is now called Varanasi, on the banks of the Ganges. And put simply, he said four profound things. That the human condition, everybody who is human will suffer. So he talked about the truth of suffering. He then went on to mention the causes of suffering. And thirdly, he said, well, there's an end to this suffering. And the fourth thing, he explained the path which leads to the end of suffering. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this tonight is if you look at the historical record of that first teaching, you'll see that the Buddha didn't just give that teaching on one day. He actually gave it over several days. And the first teaching he gave was from the Theravadan perspective. Then a few days later, he gave the same teaching from the Theravadan or Hinayana perspective. And then the final perspective he gave was the Vajrayana perspective. So Vajrayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism were connected from day one. It's not something that some invented a few years later. It's just that the nature of our human condition is that all of us respond to different things. You can look at your own members of your own family and see that brothers and sisters, husband and wife, they have similarities, but also massive differences. And so Buddhism is able to do that. So what I want to do today is, it is an introduction, because Tonglen can be quite deep, and so we don't have time for that, unfortunately. So I've got about an hour, I think, and then followed by questions if you have any. And what I propose to do is to start with a very basic of all meditations. It's got different labels. It's basically a mind-calming meditation, so we can relax our minds a bit before we get more information. I've been following Tibetan Buddhism for about, I don't know, 35 years, something like that. I'm very old. Next year I'll be 80 years young. And my own teacher, Rinpoche Rinpoche, who has taught here several times, explains meditation in these ways. Remember, I'm the messenger, not the message. He says that meditation is both a technique and a way of training our mind to be more flexible. The technique is learning how to make our minds relaxed, clear, and at the same time being in the present moment. And the more we can be more relaxed and aware and experience the joy of the present moment, the more beneficial the meditation will be, because we will gain stability of mind. And it's this stability of mind that we want to try and achieve, if possible. Stability of mind means that we understand that the mind is naturally active. When we have full confidence to allow any kind of experiences to come and go without being disturbed too much, then we can say we have stability of mind. Meditation should be a very natural experience, because there's actually nothing to do, just meditate. Meditate is not a verb, it's more like a noun. And so, whatever teachings, roots one has, the basic form of meditation usually involves following the breath, for a very practical reason, because if we're not breathing, we're dead. So, we're breathing, we must be alive. But on another level, the breath is the conduit, the connection between our physical body and our mind. And so it's through this channel of breath that we can become more relaxed. So all of you come from different traditions or no traditions, so whatever Buddhisation, whatever meditation method that you use, please do it. The most important thing is that you are relaxed, and we'll have a very short meditation just to calm ourselves from the hustle and bustle of Bangkok. So get ourselves into a comfortable position. I am sat here because of Thai protocol. Because I'm not ordained, I'm not allowed to sit on the cushion behind me. So I normally sit on the floor, but when in Rome and all that. So those of you on the floor, obviously, sit comfortably. And normally there's about 7 things to bear in mind. The first thing is to cross one's legs. The second thing is to do something with your hands, either in your lap, or your knees, or your thighs. The next thing is to be conscious of the shoulders and to consciously stretch them slightly. And that means that if you are sat on a chair like I am, it means you're not leaning back on the chair. You should be away from the chair. To use our tongue to press gently on the roof of the mouth. This is practical. If you're doing a long meditation, it stops saliva coming out of your mouth, basically. The next are eyes. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you always keep your eyes open and focused and then you relax. So I will sound this gong once to start, and then twice or 3 times to stop it. A very short meditation, just a few minutes. Has anybody never done meditation before? I should have asked that in the beginning. Okay, that's fine, excellent. So I will start us off. And as we relaxed, we will notice that thoughts will arise. This is quite okay. But the skillful thing to do is to recognize that you have thoughts, but don't get attracted to them. And one way to do this is to imagine your thoughts as bubbles, and eventually bubbles burst. And as these thought bubbles burst, something interesting happens. Space happens. Spaciousness in which you can enjoy awareness. So in our tradition, it's normal to dedicate the merit you may have accumulated to other people. So I will say that in English now, very short one. May all beings be happy and understand the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the highest bliss, which is free from suffering. And may they rest in the great equanimity, which is free of attachment and aversion. Okay, so now that we're semi-relaxed, we'll move on to the main topic of this evening. I've been very blessed because I've had the great fortune of meeting several very skillful teachers. And it is through their kindness that I'm able to pass on various things I've learnt. And Tonglen meditation is my main practice. The thing about Buddhism is that it's a bit like being invited to a Four Seasons buffet with every possible food you could possibly imagine on the planet set out before you. And if you try and eat everything, you'll be ill. So it is with Buddhism. And in our tradition, the role of a teacher is very important because that person guides you to the kind of practices that are appropriate for you, because all of us have different levels of awareness, abilities, skills, experience, and so we need something to do that. Now, although I like Buddhism, I'm not very good at rituals. I don't know much Tibetan. I know very little Pali and almost no Sanskrit. Does this make me a bad Buddhist? It may be. But I don't think so, because Buddhism transcends all that. And the great thing about this particular practice is that you don't need to know any language other than your own mother tongue to do it. You don't particularly need to be sat on a cushion necessarily. And it can be done anywhere, any place, any time. So Tonglen is Tibetan for giving and taking. And I like it because it's very counterintuitive. What do I mean by that? I mean it's counterintuitive because you deliberately seek out unpleasantness, discomfort, and suffering and transform it into something else. And normally, normal habitual tendencies for us is not to do that. What we would prefer to do normally is to close down our hearts and our minds to both pain and suffering. But because of the samsaric human condition that we're all part of, pain and suffering is inescapable. It's around all of us all the time. So if you have a mechanism to deal with this, it can be very practical. So this pain and suffering can be physical, it can be mental, it can be all kinds of pain. So our normal reaction when we're in difficult situations is to block it out, take a painkiller or move away from it or don't get involved with it. But the Vajrayana way is different from that, because suffering can be embraced and transformed into loving kindness, and it helps us to cultivate our own what's called relative bodhicitta. Now, from the Buddhist perspective, from the Vajrayana perspective, it is understood that all of us already have the essence of Buddhahood within us. And most of the time, most of us can't connect with that because of our own karma, our obscurations, our own ignorance, and things of this kind. So what this technique does is cut through that and discover our latent Buddha nature and let it radiate. So Tonglen achieves this by using suffering to crush our own ego, which potentially enables us to release our own true Buddha nature. Now, I'm losing my voice, I hope you can still hear me. Maybe I should have some water. When I lived here for 22 years as a non-immigrant resident alien, retired, I had the dubious honor of making several trips to immigration, compulsory trips. And these are things I didn't look forward to. It's 30 kilometers out of Bangkok, and it's difficult to get there. You get asked questions they already know the answer to. You've got to stand in line for hours, and who needs this? And so I thought, well, maybe I should try a Tonglen approach to this. And the Tonglen approach, as you arrive at this massive building, it is called Immigration Department, great big letters. You use a visualization technique, and you get rid of the letters and put some new letters up. And the new letters are the Palace of Patience. This is where I will learn patience. Because not that people are deliberately nasty or awkward, the bureaucratic system is not terribly user-friendly. So you say, bring it on. And after a while, I was there 22 years, I almost looked forward to going to meditation because I thought, yeah, what am I going to learn this time? And I even realized that the immigration officials, they've got to be there 7 days a week. I'm only there once every 90 days or whatever it is. So they've got a far rougher time than I have. And they are people, they have mothers and fathers, so what's the problem? So by just changing slightly the way you look at things, life can be made much more manageable. So this technique is not easy to do, and it can be done at various levels. The first level is self-Tonglen, where we conjure up the suffering that we have previously experienced and work on that. The next form of Tonglen is where we visualize the loved ones in our life, family, friends, partners, whatever, and think about their suffering and how we can change that. And then, thirdly, we can look at disagreeable people. They exist. And see how we can flip that. And finally, and the most powerful of all Tonglen, is doing Tonglen for people who really don't like us at all, even wish us harm. And they are the true teachers of Tonglen. So how do we do this? Well, I was fortunate to be introduced to this by a deceased Tibetan Buddhist practitioner called Trangu Rinpoche. And in Tibetan Buddhism, like all branches of Buddhism, it's a bit complicated. And he was the head teacher of the Karma Kagyu group of Buddhism, which I am. He was very, very skilled in this particular practice. At the time, I was running a Buddhist center in Glasgow in the evenings and a professor by day at a university. And it so happened that this guy was invited by the university to talk on something, and I persuaded him to come to our small Dharma center and asked him to give us a teaching on Tonglen meditation, which he did. And after the meditation, after the teaching, which lasted about an hour, he said to the group, there were more than 40 people in the room, there were much more. He said to the people in the room, of course, I'm not going to answer any questions, because the questions you ask now will be pretty meaningless. I'll come back in 3 years when you've had some practice, and maybe we can have a conversation. I am not going to do that, incidentally, but that's what he said. And afterwards he said to me, we're having a cup of tea or something. He said, do you have a business card? I said, yes. So I gave him the card. He said, would you like my business card? And he snapped his fingers, and a couple of monks came with a tray and a box. And they opened the box, and inside the box was a tiny golden Buddha, very small Buddha. He said, this is my business card. So I have a connection with him. I saw him a few times before he died, fortunately. So, before we start this, we have to understand, I mean, let me put this another way. Although I'm retired, I still give seminars in different parts of the world, not on Buddhism particularly, on branches of mathematics. And whether I'm in South America, North America, Asia, Europe, or Africa, people are 99% exactly the same. The basic fundamental of being a human being doesn't vary. It's the same. And one of the reasons why it's the same is because all of us want at least one thing to occur. And the word begins with H. Anybody like to volunteer what it might be? What do we want to be? Happy. Exactly. We're all of us seeking happiness in whatever way, shape or form that comes. There isn't a person on the planet, whether it's Putin or Trump or the Dalai Lama or the Pope, all human, all wanting to achieve this certain thing. And once we understand the universality of human condition, then it becomes much easier. I was fortunate to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama on more than one occasion. And every 10th of August in Japan, at Hiroshima, they remember the terrible things the Americans did to Japan when they dropped all these bombs and hundreds of thousands of people died in about 20 minutes. And so they have a prayer for peace session where the Japanese government invite spiritual luminaries across the world to give prayers for peace. And so there were people from Muslim traditions, Catholic traditions, all traditions, and the Dalai Lama was representing Buddhism on this occasion. And he kind of shocked people because he said, actually, I'm not going to give a prayer for peace because clearly prayers are not working. It's getting worse and worse and worse. So enough of the prayers already. And people thought, what the hell's going on? And he said, but there's something we can do. He said, all of us can take individual responsibility by creating our own inner peace. And only by inner peace can world peace ever flourish and take root. So how do we do this? We do this, first of all, by being able to do a short, what's in Tibetan Buddhism called Shinne meditation, or what we did 5 minutes ago, a very short meditation session just to stabilize our mind so that we are focused and grounded. And we start with the simplest form of Tonglen, which is doing Tonglen for ourselves. So we focus on our pain and suffering and visualize the combination of pain and suffering we have personally experienced accumulating outside our body in the form of a ball of thick, black, acrid smoke. Now, it's easy to visualize this in Bangkok. Pretend you're on a motorbike behind a green and red old bus that's belching out all the smoke. But the idea of the smoke is that we do something which is something counterintuitive. When we're in a smoke-filled room, we don't say, oh yeah, great smoke, let's breathe all this in. This is what you have to do. We breathe it in to our body. And we then inhale the hot black acrid smoke through our nostrils and visualize the smoke entering our body and collecting around an entity around our heart. And this entity is a symbolic representation of our ego. Think of it as a kind of very thin eggshell, strong but thin. We visualize that the black smoke gradually begins to penetrate and destroy parts of our own ego. And as it happens, the shell breaks and massive white luminosity explodes everywhere. This is the symbolic of the loving kindness from our Buddha nature by being released by the elimination of our ego. And then we rest in this luminosity and then dedicate the merit before concluding the meditation. The important thing to remember is it can be any kind of pain and suffering. It can be physical pain. It can be emotional pain. It can be any kind of pain. And the more painful experience you can recall, the more beneficial it will be. This is not what you'd expect to happen, but it can happen if this is practiced correctly. And so we can try and do this. So let's try and sit for a couple of minutes doing this. I will give you some guidance as the process evolves. So we get into a comfortable position, as before. I'll sound a gong in a minute and then guide you through the process I'm trying to explain. So now we are recalling, imagining, or visualizing difficulties in our life. It could be the death of a partner. It could be an illness that you currently have or have been suffering from. It could be just an argument with a friend. It could be any of these and more. And you can think of more than one thing. But it has to be a real experience. And think of this unpleasant experience and try and convert this experience into the physical form of a ball of hot, black, acrid smoke in front of you. Having done that, we breathe it in. And as we breathe it in, it begins to attack our ego. And at a certain time, the ego cracks, and the limitless luminosity of our Buddha nature radiates in all directions very strongly and purifies us of our suffering and anyone else that might be in the vicinity. And we just rest in this pleasant luminosity. Now, the next one, we try and do it with our loved one or ones. We imagine that they're sat opposite us and think of the situation. In my own experience, I travel a lot, and my father was in hospital with whatever illness. He was in intensive care, basically. I was, I don't know, thousands of miles away. And so I contacted my teacher, and I said, is there anything my mother can do? She is in the hospital, you know, to make my father, he was terminal, he was going to die, there was no question about it. He said, yes, but you have to be strong. You have to instruct the clinicians what they should do. And he was under some kind of breathing apparatus or whatever. And it's better if people die in a relaxed way, not in a traumatic way. And so I got on the phone to these medics and said, look, my father's about to die. We want him to die peacefully, so will you please remove all the stuff that's keeping him alive? He said, well, he's going to die. I said, yes, so are you, and so am I. It happens. And eventually, they reluctantly agreed to do that. And my mother knew how to do this Tong thing. And then an interesting thing happened. Just before he died, he opened his eyes and was able to squeeze my mother's hand gently, and then he just drifted off. That is much better than being in a morphine halo, isn't it? And so it can be very practical in that sense, but that's a rather extreme example. So let's think of someone that's not you, someone, your partner, your friend, whoever, your parents, who may either be alive or not alive, and if they're alive, think of difficulties that they may have had, and think of them, and imagine their difficulties in the form of hot black smoke arising in front of you, and you do the same with that situation. Some people who've not done this before, maybe who don't have very stable meditation, get a bit worried that they're going to choke with hot black smoke. You're not. We're imagining this. But it can be quite useful to do that in that sense. So let us try this short meditation with bearing in mind the person or persons in your life that mean the most to you, the closest to you, that may have had or are having difficulties. And shall we try and do that? If you can't visualize your loved one perfectly, visualize their essence, the feeling, the aura that they have whenever you're in their presence. Then think about difficulties they may have. And remember, the greater the suffering that your loved one experienced, the more useful it is to generate your bodhicitta, to release your Buddha nature. So the worse the experience, the more powerful it can be in terms of transformation. So as this hot, black, acrid smoke enters your body, cracks your ego, releases the luminosity of your Buddha nature, you feel very expansive and positive, and this luminous white light radiates in all directions. this is a practice quite useful and practical in the sense that when people are very seriously ill and family members know this, there's a great feeling of helplessness. There's only so much what pharmacology can do. And this Tonglen does not cure cancer. But what it does do is allow you to have a different perspective on whatever it is that's causing the difficulty. So, because we all have difficulties being human, the important thing is not what actual difficulties we experience. The important thing is how we deal with it, how we react to it. That is the important thing. And to learn Tonglen properly, you can't do it in 45 minutes, unfortunately. And it's taken me quite a while to do this. And certainly in the 25 years of my retirement, or whatever it is, I go to a retreat centre on an island in Scotland for a month, and then in a mountain in Sierra Nevada in Andalusia, where people bring me food once a day or whatever. And then you can really sort of get into it. So this conceptually is very simple, but to actually do is quite another thing. And I like it because you can be on a crowded subway, a bus in the Andes, or storm at sea. You don't need to be cross-legged particularly. You can do it almost anywhere. But because it's very simple in concept, it shouldn't make you think that it's an easy thing to do. It isn't. But it can be very beneficial. And the other thing, of course, this is not for everybody. There are some people who are much more comfortable in learning mantras, in doing other forms of Buddhist practice. That's fine. You have to find the particular thing which suits you. And I was brought up a Christian, brought up in the UK. We were social Christians. We would go to weddings, funerals and Christmas. We weren't really serious Christians in that sense. So I wasn't really engaged in spirituality much until I did meet this teacher, Ringo Tulku Rinpoche. And this was a fortuitous accident. I wrote my first book in, I don't know, 30 years ago, whatever it was. And I got writer's block. I couldn't quite finish it. And I was getting very irritable and annoying all the friends around me. And they suggested, look, Andy, just go somewhere quiet and get this book out of your system and then rejoin the human race. You are a waste of space. And I said, so where do I go? And they said, well, there's this monastery in Scotland, Buddhist monastery. That'll be cheap. That'll be quite, go there. So I did. So I finished the book in about 4 days, feeling pretty chipper. I'm walking in the forest. I see this guy in maroon robes, obviously a monk, and he comes up to me and says, oh, so you're interested in Buddhism? I said, not at all. He said, what are you doing here then? I said, well, it's cheap and quiet. He said, yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So he invited me for a cup of tea, and he was a special guy because his English was pristine, although it was Tibetan. I mean, it was not just, it was good. And he also had a PhD. He was an educated man. And this was about March sometime in a cold Scottish spring. And he said, would you like my card? I thought, oh, that's be interesting. So I got this card, and he said that he lived in a place called Sikkim, that I've never even heard of. It's a small part of India sandwiched between Bhutan and Nepal in the Himalayas. He said, did you know that in August you will come to India? I thought, yeah, right. And I'd never been to Asia at all. I thought, well, actually, I'm in Italy in August, so thank you for the card, but, you know, this isn't going to work. And I didn't think any more about it. And then I went back to work at the university, and my boss said, oh, someone's been taken ill. We need someone to give a seminar in Singapore, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur. It was easy money, why not? And in those days, jet planes couldn't fly direct from London to Singapore. They all had to stop somewhere. And my plane stopped in Delhi. So I thought, okay, I'll have a holiday. You know, and I didn't think anything of it. And I suddenly opened my wallet and I saw his card there. I thought, oh, yeah. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just say hello, like you do. And he said, so when you're coming? He said, oh, I'm not coming. It's the middle of the monsoon. You're 700 miles away. This isn't going to happen. And but he did tell me that he got a PhD from Varanasi University in India. So I went to Varanasi University. I said, I want to see the thesis of this guy. I want to see his supervisor. Who is this guy? Yeah? And he checked out okay. I checked all of that. So I decided to go to Sikkim, which is a complicated journey. You know, in India, travel is never easy. And finally get there. I checked into this small guest house in Gangtok, which is a place there. And this Tibetan guy in reception, he said, are you Andy? I said, yes. Oh, don't stay here. Stay with us. I said, who are you? He said, I'm the brother of Rinpoche. Okay, why not? So I stayed there. And so every day, for a few days, we would go on walks in the mountains and what have you, talk about various things. And one day I said to him, you know, I think I'll become a Buddhist. He said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. He said, nothing wrong with Christianity. Why do you want to be a Buddhist? And that's another story for another time. But eventually, he said, well, if you're serious, you should take refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. But my monastery is in Tibet, and you know, I'm just living in a small house. I said, I'm glad, because I'm not a smells and bells kind of person, so can't we do it in your house? Yes, no problem. And so I did that, and he said, how long have you got before you've got to go back to Europe? I said, well, I've got a couple of weeks. He said, well, I think you should go on a pilgrimage. I used to be a mountaineer when I was younger, so mountains are not a big deal to me. And so he said, I want you to find this lake called Ketcheperi. And when you're there, you'll know why you're there. I said, what? And he said, we showed it in the map. It's not on a bus route. You've got to walk about 20 kilometers or whatever. And, but it's a very special lake, and whatever you do, you must not pollute this lake by swimming in the lake. It's surrounded by prayer flags and snow mountains, and it's a very precious place. And when you're there, you'll realize why you're there. Okay. So eventually I get there, and just before I get to the lake, I get a very strange sensation in my boots. I take my boots off, and my feet are covered in leeches. These are worm-like insects that don't kill you, but it feels disgusting that all these insects are feeding on your blood. You know, it's not a pleasant sensation. And I thought, how do I get rid of these guys? And so there's a big lake there, so I took my boots off and started polluting this holy lake with my blood. And then a strange thing happened. I looked in the lake, and there's a reflection of someone stood behind me. He was some kind of nomad, but not like a normal. I mean, most mountain people are quite small in stature, but this guy was quite tall. He didn't like he'd ever shaved in his life and smelled quite a bit. And he thought it was very funny. And he just lifted me up, took me to the edge of the forest, where the woman he was living with bound my feet with various herbs to stop the bleeding. And after a day there, he more or less said, okay, go now. And I thought, where do I go? And I went over this ridge and found this mountain track. And I thought, I've got to wait for some transport. 8 hours passed, no transport. Then in the distance, there was dust. And it was kind of a truck with seats in the back. I thought, I've got to get this truck to stop. So I pushed boulders onto the track. So he had to stop. He wasn't very pleased, but what can you do? And then someone in the back of the track spoke English. He said, where are you going? I said, wherever you're going. That's where I'm going. And they were going to a place called Beijing. I got there. I said, where are you really going? I'm going to Gantok. Okay. Well, my brother's going to Gantok tomorrow. I thought, I'm going to get robbed. No, forget that. So thanks very much. I'll get a bus. And I slept in. I missed the bus. And his brother said, well, we're still going to Gantok. I said, okay. So, I don't know, 20 of us piled in this jeep on this mountainous trek. And then suddenly, there was big panic, of shouting. And what had happened, there'd been a landslide, and the bus I was supposed to be on had washed away into the valley, everybody dead, and we had to pick our way, eventually got back to Bangkok. And my teacher was not at all impressed. Neither was my boss at the university, so I was 5 days getting back. He said, why are you late? I said, well, if I told you wouldn't believe me, I'm here. Just suck it up. If you want to hear the full version of this, BBC did a program about this. It's on Radio 4 if you do deep dive into BBC sounds and stuff like that. But the important thing is that as a mathematician, I don't believe in coincidence. And I think luck, it can be defined where planning meets opportunity. It doesn't just emerge spontaneously out of nothing. So there must have been something in me, a preparedness for something to happen, and the two things came together, all of which has nothing to do with Tong Len. Sorry. Yeah, so I was talking about the importance of retreats and things. They are important to really understand things in more detail. And before I digress into more anecdotes, I should say that those of you who want to know more about Tong Len from the source, as it were, if you go to the website, you'll see I've put a 2-page Word document there which gives the references and the books, the web links, etc., if you want to delve into this more deeply. But there was a reason I told this story, is because in the Tibetan tradition at least, I think in all Buddhist traditions, you've got to do due diligence with whoever is a teacher. There's a lot of charlatans about. A lot of people who talk very nicely and don't have pure motivation. And so you really have to dig deep to make sure that the person who is a teacher is of the right lineage, if you see what I mean, and that things are in order. Because this is not, unfortunately, because teachers are human too, and they're fallible in many, many ways. So if you see a good teacher, and not just one teacher, I have several teachers, because people have different skills which are possible to give in that particular way. Okay, so before I ask the questions, if there are any, I will say a prayer that we do know that the Buddha actually wrote. He didn't write it in English, but I will say the English version. And these are what's sometimes known as the 5 recollections. And it's recommended that we do it at least daily, in the morning, just before we go to sleep or whatever. And here they are. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, shall become otherwise separated from me. I am the owner of my karma, born of my karma, rest, abide in my karma. Whatever karma I shall be, for good or for ill, of that we must reflect. So, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. Yes, Joe. Oh.
I have a microphone.
Oh.
Is there questions?
Yes.
So, doing Tong then with eyes open, is that right?
Yes.
It's a little tricky to visualize something in front of you. And then
Right. Well, eyes open doesn't mean stare. It means rest your vision. The eyes, as the cliche says it, are the windows of the mind. And if you can meditate with your eyes open, it means that you can get the benefit of meditation when you're not sat on a cushion. I remember that a German student of Rinpoche, my teacher, asked him once, Rinpoche, that's the Tibetan for precious teacher, how many hours a day do you actually meditate? Remember, it's German, so Germans do things, Vorsprung durch Technik, you do things correctly. And my teacher smiled and he said, well, actually, I don't bother with that. And the German looked at me almost scandalized. But what he didn't understand, the German guy, was that meditation as such is a necessary prerequisite to making a spiritual connection. It's not the end, it's the beginning, basically. And when you meet, I've had the great privilege, I said, people really realize, people like His Holiness Dalai Lama, he is an embodiment of this aspect of meditation, in that he almost glows. It's a very difficult thing to explain verbally. I once organized an international architectural competition to design a retreat center on a remote island in the Outer Hebrides. And I persuaded the Dalai Lama to be one of the judges of the competition. There were 700 architects from all over the world who paid $1,000 non-returnable entry fee for this competition. And so a winner was chosen. And His Holiness Dalai Lama was at this monastery in Scotland a few years later that I first went to. And he asked that I see him. He demanded that I see him. 10 a.m. tomorrow morning sort of thing. And so I went to see him, just me, his bodyguard, and him. And he says to me, "Are you Andy?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I have a question for you." "Oh yeah? What's the question?" He said, "This competition, aren't we creating misery and suffering for 699 architects? What's Buddhist about that?" Half joking, half not joking. And we had a conversation about various things. Then he had to go, obviously. And then a strange thing happened. Never happened to me before, at least. Was that his attendant came up to me after His Holiness had left, and he said, "Have you seen your face?" I said, "What do you mean?" So I felt my face, and I'd been crying profusely. My face was wet. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "It's okay, it's good." When you're in the presence of such a person of great purity, they have the capacity to extract negativity from you in the medium of tears. Not all of my negativity, but some of it at least. in that way. So that's what I mean by that. So your question, eyes open, it really means that meditation is being mindful, awake. And there are different views of this in different traditions. In Theravadan traditions, it's not normal to keep your eyes open, for example. But in the Tibetan tradition, it is. Yeah? Give me a microphone.
Thank you. It can be louder.
I think it's
Teachers are pretty loud, typically. So I've been practicing here and then the metta
Oh, yes.
meditation from the Waking Up app. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And I realized, I wonder how close Tonglen is to metta, because metta starts very
Yeah.
easy
Yeah.
by wishing well with people you love,
Mm-hmm.
who are easy to give love to, and then move on to the more difficult to love people. But with Tonglen, you start with your own suffering, which
Yes.
is pretty hard.
Well, yes. I mean, before you can help others, you've got to help yourself. That's the idea. That if you're in a terrible emotional state, you're not going to be great to live use to other people. And so first one must stabilize oneself so that one's own meditation is stable, and then from this particular perspective it can be said. I mean, meditation itself is not exclusive Buddhist thing. In trying to think of the branch of Catholicism, it'll come to me. Doesn't matter. There's one particular branch of Catholicism where they specialize in what they call contemplation, which is a similar kind of thing. In fact, probably all spiritual traditions have some kind of introspective, solitary situation. And the great thing about the Vajrayana approach in particular is that it seeks to make a connection with our pre-existing Buddha nature, which we already have. And we can't see it because of our own negativity, not because it's not there. And so we don't have to rely on an external thing to make us better. We can do it ourselves. That's the concept with that particular one. And with meditation in general, I think it's always cumulative. If you do a little often, the benefit arises. It can be more beneficial in a way than what I call boot camp meditation. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, morning, noon and night meditation. Good luck to you. But once you start more gradually, so it becomes more sustainable, I think that's the idea. And even though I can say this, you can say, well, you're retired, you've got lots of time, what's your problem? But even when I wasn't retired, when I was busy, everybody has at least 5 or 10 minutes a day I put to you that you can use in meditation. If you're in a family and you've got children and stuff happening around you, you have to negotiate that time with your family and say, look, at this time I don't want to be interrupted. Just for 10 minutes, just leave me alone. And whatever works for you. But yes, there is a strong connection with that. I would just say the difference between the loving kindness metta bhavana approach, which is very good and positive, to Tonglen, is that Tonglen is a bit more turbocharged in the sense that you are going directly to discover your Buddha nature and work on that and use negative external things to make it more luminous more frequently in that way. That probably doesn't answer your question, but that's all I got. Sorry.
It did. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. I was a little bit confused when you did the Tong with a thinking of some
Yes,
visualize
yes.
the partner in front of you. Were they supposed to breathe in their smoke?
No.
You're supposed to breathe in
Yes.
their smoke.
You do everything.
Okay.
That's okay. But like the guy said, you've got to do it for 3 years, then you might discover something. It's a very elongated process in that particular way. It's not something that happens like that. But have any of you come across Tibetan Buddhism in any shape or form previously? Can you say anything?
Well, I just read some books.
Okay.
The Tibetan Book of Death, and then some movies of Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay.
I don't know if it's relevant. I never heard of all of them.
Well, there's so many teachings. It's it's a vast a library of things to understand in that way. But yeah, it's one of the things I do. I'm the chair of a UK-based charity which raises money for a community in eastern Tibet called Kham. Now trying to call it Sichuan, but it's really Kham. And it's the place where my teacher was born. He can't go back to Tibet for, political reasons, as you can imagine. And he has a community there that he feels responsible for. So we raise money to provide healthcare, education, and any disaster relief, because it's prone to earthquakes and all kinds of stuff in that part of the world. So that's something that's interesting. And I'm amazed by people's generosity. It's I open a letter from a total stranger with $100,000 check in it and things out of the blue. It's incredible how things happen, but somehow they do. And so he's able to travel and do his stuff, knowing that the background of his place is still in a secure situation. Yeah.
Got a question about
Come over, Mike.
Tibetan. This is really quick one. What is unique about what is unique about Tibetan Buddhism compared to that's
Well, it's got a difference of emphasis. A difference of emphasis. In Theravadan Buddhism, the teachers will say that to become enlightened will take many lifetimes. It's a bit like, if you think of Buddhism as a mountain, there's many ways up that mountain. There's a long, slow Theravadan path, and you're still the same mountain, you will still get there. Then there's the Zen or Mahayana approach, which is slightly more direct. Whereas the Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana approach is very direct. It says you're already at the top of the mountain, but you don't realize it. But it's the same mountain. And which path you follow depends on your own karma, your own span of awareness, the particular connections that you have made in the past. There's no big disagreement fundamentally. My teacher is known as what's known as a Rime teacher, which means that from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view, he's trained in all the main 4 or 5 schools. There's no sectarian stuff going on there at all. And so that's the difference. It's the way you see it. Vajrayana says we are all Buddhas, not in an arrogant way, but in a way which says, actually, if with the right circumstances and right teachers, you can actually achieve this. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there is a particular 3 or 4 year retreat, which is designed to accelerate this process.
It's actually got into the next question. I was going to ask, what is the best way to learn Tibetan Buddhism? Meaning that, I know there's books out there, movies out there, but since you actually had a Rinpoche,
Yes.
so can you make some recommendations in getting introduced to it? Or
Yeah. What I'd like to do, if you leave me your email address, I will email you a reading list which might be useful. How about that?
sounds good.
Okay?
I have the next question, and it's more about, I'm not German, but it's more about purpose and technique. So we have in Mahayana and Theravada traditions, it's more about mindfulness, so it's more about technique of observing. So we observe our consciousness as it is, and trying to make sense of what Buddha said and about the truth he talked about, as far as I understand it. And here on Tibetan techniques, we have very different approach, because we are actively participate in what we have in our consciousness. Yes, so we visualize something, we not just observe. So I was wondering, what is the reasons of these differences in technique? What are the underlying presuppositions which are different?
Okay.
Because it's very...
I can give you a reference too, if you give me an email later. In the beginning, I tried to allude to this when I was talking about the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are plain for everyone to see, and so what's the problem? But if you look at it from a Mahayana perspective, new things appear. If you look at it from a Vajrayana perspective, again, new things appear. All perspectives are valid. None are more valid than another. They're just different. So, with the Vajrayana approach, we are already Buddha. We have the potential to be Buddha. But we cannot connect with that until we have got rid of some of the things that are blocking us from doing that. And by doing Dharma practice, this is one route to do that. So which country are you from?
I'm from Russia.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we have different approaches here, but the reason and the purpose of visualizing
Yeah.
things, it makes to our consciousness a lot. So we just imagine some kind of like inner Buddhahood. We have similarities in Mahayana traditions like them. They are also really like open that we are already
Yeah.
Buddha. Yeah, but we have like very different approach here, because we, as I said, we actively participate here. So the question was like, why is it so different? Not about because there are probably different ideas behind.
Yeah.
Or not? Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it's not about right and wrong. I think I would answer it by saying this, that one of the amazing aspects of Buddhism in its entirety is its depth and variability. It's able to understand that the nature of the human condition is so vast and varied that there is a route for people to connect to whatever their particular perception. And so it's a question of individuals being able to identify with the approach which they understand and feel comfortable with and follow that, not denying that other approaches are also valid. But I'm afraid it's like with any skill, you have to practice it to see which one is the one for you in that sense. Well, we are all very sentient beings. You know when you know. I mean, how do you know when you meet someone who you want to spend the rest of your life with? You know, I mean, there's a deep connection. And similarly, with a teacher that resonates with you, you'll be able to see that connection too.
What if there is no teacher? There's just a teaching.
Well, the teacher with with YouTube and the internet, I think you can find teachers. Depends which part of the world you're in, but you know, the internet is different in different parts of the world.
Well, I really related with what you said about the banquet because
Yeah.
with the waking up app, Sam Harris offers a variety
Yeah.
of approaches, but he focuses on non-duality, and obviously that's what I'm aiming at.
Mhm.
And I haven't yet settled on a single approach that I would do consistent practice with.
Are you familiar with the writings of Trungpa, the Tibetan teacher? He's dead, but his writings still live on. Again, if you give me your email address, I'll give you some readings. How are we doing for time? Oh. Are we okay for time? Okay. There's one at the front when you're done. Okay.
Or I can just ask. Well, he's
Record it so people can hear on the record. Okay.
So, yeah. Sorry. Thank you for bringing it. Thanks. So, you mentioned that this sounds like a simple technique,
Yeah.
if I may say so, simple meditation approach, which I always thought it was.
Mhm.
And you also mentioned that it's not easy.
No.
Unfortunately, I thought it was easy, so I get into this and I feel very happy, and then I get out of it and back to normal living in the world. So, is that something I'm really missing, so that it's something which you say is not easy?
Mhm.
I kind of feel that it is simple and you
Wow.
just get into it and you're happy.
Well, I'm pleased for you that it is easy. In a way, it is easy. But what I'm saying is, to go through the various levels of Tonglen can be quite difficult. I think the Japanese have a great expression which says something like this: never push on an open door. You know, I mean, it's already there, so you shouldn't have to struggle to get there, so that's fine. But you know it's working is how stable you are mentally and, not mentally, what's the word, emotionally stable. If you're in difficult situations, how do you react to that?
Okay, I understand what you're
Yeah,
going with that, right?
because the most frequent way that people react is immediate. Oh, we run away from things or run towards things. But how often have we had a conversation with people, our friends or whatever, and we've said things we really regret? And sometimes it's best to say nothing for count to 10 before you reply and really think about it, and that can be useful. So are you throwing us out of the room now?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So you said that Tonglen was your primary practice?
Yeah.
Do you have other practices as
Yeah.
well? Is there something you find that complements this?
I'm a terrible practitioner, you know, so I'm not a role model for anybody. But I have done this for quite some time and find it very useful. But I think the thing is, what I'd like to end on really is to say that stress the importance of regular, even if it's just a small, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, it can be very useful. And yeah, if I want to learn a practice, well, I would go to a retreat and invest some time in it, having first been taught it by someone else, and then try and practice it. But I'm not one that does many different practices, although I've been introduced to many. It comes back to your question. I found, for me, this is useful, so I stay with it.
If I understand the teachings correctly, so naturally we want to sort of seek out pleasant experiences as much as possible and avoid unpleasant experiences. That's sort of just our evolved natural state. So we'd all like rather spend a day at the beach and avoid the day of immigration. And when doing the visualization exercise that we did, it seems to me that it's almost like embracing all of the difficult experiences that one may go through, whether it's illness or other kinds of difficult experiences, and seeing those things as being almost like necessary conditions for self-development. I just want to understand, is that
Yeah.
interpretation correct?
Let me give an example to answer the question. My elder brother is suffering from bowel cancer of a particularly nasty form. He is not particularly interested in Buddhism, but I've introduced him to Tong. I didn't call it Tong, I called it something else. And he finds it quite interesting because what he notices with chronic pain, it's not bad all of the time. Even if it's bad half the time it's not bad. And so what you can do with this kind of practice is make the period of no pain seem longer than it actually is. Do you see what I mean? In that sense, it's very practical.
Okay, I think we're going to end on that.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time, Andy. It was very interesting. I personally have interest in Tibetan Buddhism, so I want that reading list too. A couple housekeeping things. So Andy has no request or requirement for funds, but we do have a box outside that helps support the space. And so if you'd like to give your donation to that box, that would be really great. And then second thing is, if you will grab the chairs that you're sitting on, and maybe one or two next to you, the brown chairs will go out here. I'll help you stack them out there. And then the white chairs go behind this kind of hanging cloth outside. So if you can grab the chairs out there, you'll see how they stack. And I don't actually know the schedule for next week, but we will be back here next week at the same time.